Welcome back to the Pre-Vetted podcast, where we spotlight extraordinary people and remarkable talent reshaping our world. Our guest today is Rob Terry. He's the founder and CEO of SeafoodAI. It's a Techstars, NEC X, BlueSwell backed startup that brings the 400 billion seafood industry into the digital age with AI-driven biometric scanners and cloud logbooks that automate sorting, slash waste, and create tamper-proof sea-to-table traceability records. Hello, Rob. How are you doing today?
Doing great. How are you doing?
I am doing great. Can you tell us a little bit more about what Seafood AI is?
Yeah, Seafood AI. Actually, Seafood AI is my second startup. So I'll tell you a little bit about my first startup because it was also in the same sort of sustainable seafood space. And that was called SmartCatch. And what we did was we created real-time video cameras, sensors, controllable lights for inside of industrial trawl net fishing boats so that they could see a mile and a half away and 1,000 meters deep what was happening in their nets in real time. This was primarily for these big industrial boats. And when they go out fishing, they tow their nets for anywhere from 1 to 4 hours and can catch anywhere from 10,000 to 40,000 pounds of fish in a single haul, which means being able to see in real time what was happening had great benefits to make sure that they were really getting the target species that they were after and not juveniles or some non-target species. And then also, they burn a lot of fuel oil, which is very acidic for the ocean. And so sometimes they're dragging their nets and they're gotten caught up with tree trunks or boulders and they're not being productive, but they're still burning all that fuel oil. So being able to see in real time is a real benefit for them. We had some good traction, but the pandemic, unfortunately, was a big problem for a young startup. So we ended up licensing that technology. And Seafood AI is essentially a reboot of this idea of being able to really look critically at the point of harvest and be able to provide feedback or information that makes that harvest more sustainable, that provides more information about the area that's being harvested. And also then we're digitizing at that point, creating these anchor points in the supply chain so then the seafood could be traced through with less waste and more accountability. So Seafood AI is we're building these biometric seafood scanners, starting with crabs, and deploying them for wild capture so that the way the portable device works, you put a crab on it on a little scan plate, it's size of like a carry-on suitcase, flashes a red or green light to let the harvester know whether it's legal to keep or not. And then behind the scenes, it's taking pictures of the bottom and top of the crab, doing some analysis of the size, the weight, the gender, and collecting all that data, putting that into a data table, and then aggregating those data tables up in the cloud so then you could see the trends of how and what was being harvested, and then be able to do better prediction of the fishery, and then ultimately be able to create a better market price for the product.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, I saw on your LinkedIn the post of the table with the crab.
Yeah, so that's the beginning. We're also creating an automated version that will go into factories so that when they're on the factory line, they could basically scan each crab as it comes by and then sort according to the best market for that particular animal. So is it good for live market? Is it good for whole frozen to be butchered? And being able to know that in real time and sort accordingly, the processor can get a better price for their effort, and it creates less manual sorting also. And so that's where we're hoping to evolve the product.
Is that box the one that you call CrabScan 360?
Yeah, CrabScan 360. That's the portable one. That portable box, it turns out it works really well for aquaculture as well. So for aquaculture, they'll maybe have a tank of like 20,000 fish, and they'll take 20 out, put them to sleep, weigh and measure each one. And they do that so that they could determine, do they have all the environmental parameters set up optimally for the fish? Are they feeding them enough? Is everything optimal for high growth? And so they'll do the sampling. We went in with the University of Southern Mississippi. They have a large aquaculture center, and we used our scanner We adjusted it so that it would do the size and weight measurement for finfish, and we were able to do that in like a quarter of the time. So you put the fish on, hit a button, snaps a picture, does the analysis, fills out a data table, puts that data table up into a data repository. And so we want to see about getting into that market with that product.
Right, so you're finding a new market for a product that you already developed. That's interesting.
Yeah, and it's still along the same lines, because ultimately you want your seafood to be traceable, whether it's farmed or whether it's harvested from the ocean. You
Right.
still need to have that. Where did it come from? Where is it and how old is it? Where is it going? All that sort of information. So with that scanner, we could create those anchor points.
And then you're building the software to do the traceability up until the table, right?
Yeah, so ultimately what we are creating is like a digital manifest. So imagine you pull the crab out of your warehouse at the ocean, and then you essentially create a fingerprint for it, and then you start accumulating information as it goes through the supply chain. So to start with, where it was harvested, what time, what weight, pictures of it, and then it moves to the processor, how it moved there, what was the dates. Once it's in the processor, it's rechecked in, so now we have a chain of custody for it. We know where it came from, and then the harvester can do its processing and then print a label, that then the label can be traced back. And so
Right.
You can better inform the whole supply chain in this way. You can do better job of managing the fisheries because you got more information. You can do a better job of moving the product through, which is a perishable commodity, without it spoiling or wasting, because now you're tracking it. And then you could do a better job of processing it because you're able to look at it case by case. And in each one of these instances, you're collecting more and more information that could then be aggregated with other information to better inform of managing the fishery, of setting the market price, setting up your equipment in the processor to be able to do that with more efficiency. And ultimately, at the end of all this, the idea is to have a system where when you go into a grocery store and you're paying a premium because it's like sustainably caught, so therefore it's a better product and you're going to pay a little bit more. Well, what happens now is it goes into the pockets of the final seller. So if you go into Whole Foods, you buy the premium piece of filet that was sustainably caught, Whole Foods pockets that premium. Whereas all the way down the supply chain, the producer, the harvester, the processor, they've all had to comply to certain rules and regulations, but since there's no real chain of custody, a real strong connection, they're not able to benefit from that premium. And so with this system, everybody in this value chain would be able to benefit from exposing their data and is essentially creating value for that data.
You mentioned Seafood AI is using AI, right? Where is actually running? On the boat or in the cloud?
Well, the AI is still up and coming. There's basically machine vision and learning for doing the discrimination of the size and the gender and species. And then we're hoping to, and then in terms of the whole integration with the back end, to be able to do more predictive analysis and be able to provide this sort of insight into what's happening in the fisheries and then also in the supply chain itself. And then to better inform, in the case of growers, how to better optimize their tanks and feed ratios. All this kind of information is where that's evolved.
How does the scanner, the Crab Scan 360 work, and how does it tell if it meets the legal requirements?
So it does an analysis of the size, weight, and the gender. So whether it's female,
Right.
A lot of times means it's not legal to keep. If it's under a certain size, the size of the carapace, the shell, under a certain size, then it's not legal to keep. If it's under a certain weight, in some states, it's not legal to keep. And so it'll scan for all these parameters and then
Right.
do a match, based upon the legality of that particular region.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah. So it's all, but behind the scenes, it's just a red or green light, keep or not keep. So the idea is to make it very streamlined for the operator.
Right, because they are the operation, on the boat must be very complicated, right?
Well, it's very aggressive. Fishing is one of the most dangerous professions in the world. So they're very risk averse. They don't want new things particularly because if it's worked before and they've been safe doing it, they want to sort of continue with that.
Right.
So it makes it
Right.
kind of challenging.
Yeah. So you can understand the, simple interface.
Simple interface. It's what we want to build, or what we're building are appliances. You turn them on, and that's just what they do. They tell you whether your crab's legal to keep, and provide an accurate count of what's being sampled.
Right. Right. So for the company, they have more insights than what they have right now, because right now it's more of a guesswork, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of this industry is run on paper and pencil and
Right.
logbooks. So even on the commercial fishing boats, they have to keep a paper logbook, and all that information, which is really ground truth information, is really locked up in filing cabinets because it's not really collected to be connected. And
Right.
so that's the missing thing is that it's worked that way for thousands of years, hundreds of years, but there's just been more and more people and more demand and interest in seafood. And with the pressures of climate change, what's happened, is we're creating a perfect storm. So boats have gotten bigger, nets have gotten bigger, but the discrimination hasn't really evolved. It's like you wouldn't expect cows or chickens to go extinct because we're over harvesting them. But in the ocean, that's not true for a lot of the species that we are dependent on, are going extinct because of this lack of the industry to really support an evolved state of wild capture.
Right. Right. So having more fine accountability of what is being harvested would not only be beneficial for the industry, but also would allow us to preserve the fish for longer.
Yeah, absolutely. The analogy is like, imagine we have this large Amazon warehouse, no lights, no windows, right? And it's like
Right.
we've got a demand for a certain amount of fish. We know we could kind of go in there, we could feel our way around it and find it, bring it back. But we're really not doing that accounting, that inventory control system. We're not accounting well for what we're taking out, where we're taking it out. So the fishing, the real ground terrain, the types of species, to a fine detail enough that fisheries can be really proactively managed in a sustainable way.
Right. Right. And
So that's a missing layer.
and the storage is finite, right? So eventually we're going to run out of stock.
Yeah, I mean that's the sad truth is that we're already doing a bad job of placing too much demand on it, and it's a commodity that it's been very abundant for a very long time, and there
Right.
really hasn't been lots and lots of problems. There's been problems. But it's basically it's a $400 billion industry that loses somewhere between 50 and 80 billion a year, just a straight up loss from inefficiency, fragmented data, manual processes, old technology. And so it's the industry itself is on this cycle of losing more and more value out of it without by staying in this sort of analog sort of age. And so so we think that there's great business opportunity, great growth opportunity, but it's a very entrenched industry. So it's very it's challenging in a lot of ways.
Yes. I see what you're talking about.
Yeah.
How much do you think that seafood AI could help the harvesting companies on the economic side? What do you think would be the impact for them?
Yeah, well, we hope to reduce the amount of labor, the amount of effort it takes in order to get what your target species is in your net and landed on the dock. So we want to build basically a tireless deckhand. So it's a sorting machine on a boat, on an industrial crab boat, that would and be able to count where the discards go. So the discards are nails, where are we, those are that's a missing data gap. And so the value we could bring to the industry starts there. If we're able to better inform fishery managers so that they could close off those spawning areas and open up other areas that have older mature males that are what we're after harvesting, then that creates a more sustainable the help on the boat is First, in terms of this labor. Second, we could do a gentler, with less mortality, discards from the boat, so not an angry crewman throwing crabs overboard. Being pushed out of a chute, a discard chute, and then we could document that, and then we could tell the fisherman, the captain, how many crabs are actually going into their tanks, so that they could optimize their quota. They could do a better job of knowing whether they should move on to the next pod or go back to port. Less waste less fuel, less work per effort to get those crabs in. And then the fishermen could be reporting to the processor, how many crabs they have coming in, so the processor could, do a better job of setting up their equipment. Should these be, frozen or sent to a live market, or, should we be setting up our butchering? And all these things add value, because they're removing waste and they're removing inefficiency. So the value that we could have to the industry, I think it could be profound as it moves into a digital age. So not only are we doing all this record keeping and data collection, we're actually able to optimize all these different processes.
Not only you're adding value to the individual harvesting companies, but also the industry as a whole, and the government that could have more information and more insights on how to regulate the industry so it's more sustainable overall.
Yeah, more sustainable and more profitable. So instead of the government taking away, it's actually contributing to, the value of the industry.
Interesting.
Yeah. That's the bigger mission for what we're after.
Right. And what milestones are you aiming to hit, in the next 12 months with SeafoodAI? Where in which part of the journey are you right now?
Yeah, so we're at the point where we're filed for some patents, built out the business model, know what we're after, built working prototypes, and now we're at that stage where we're raising capital so that we could productize. In other words, create commercial products of these scanners and start selling them to the aquaculture fish farms and regulators that are doing, field sampling like the Fish and Wildlife, and then be building out our first prototype for the factory scanner.
Right. You mentioned earlier before we start recording that you are looking for funds, right?
Yeah, indeed.
Yes. So what target funding are you looking for, and how are you planning to invest it?
Yeah, so we're looking for around $200,000 to basically take the field scanners and turn them into products that we could sell into the aquaculture farms and nurseries and hatcheries in particular. Yeah, so we've got a lot of the software, the analysis, the cloud repository, all that, and it's just now putting it all together into a package that we could sell and support.
Right. Also, I noticed you have experience working with Whole Foods, the e-commerce. Right?
Yep.
How does that experience shape your view of supply chains?
Yeah, well, so my experience with Whole Foods was right around Y2K. I was part of a small team that we built out their first major e-commerce offering with the whole back-end fulfillment. So it was back in the day, they had guys with Palm Pilots that would get the orders, pack them, ship them, report back up to the website. So, and it taught me a lot about how much waste there was in the supply chain, and how little we really, know about that. And what I also saw was how the organic industry, grew from what was very loosely regulated, back in the 90s, where it's like you can get certified to be organic even if you're right next to a major highway with all the lead from the exhaust coming down onto your plants. Whereas today it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and they've really it's really built by consumer demand, by consumer drive. I mean, it's really incredible. And so I see the type of model that could also work for seafood in this way, where people really want their seafood to be sustainable. They really want to know where it came from. They really want that certifications. And this is one of the big problems with the industry is so now less than maybe 12% of seafood in the world's been certified as sustainable. I think less than 3 or 4% of crabs have been, because the whole system for certification is so it's so old school. It's very expensive. Inspectors going on site, looking at logbooks, setting up a plan, coming back 6 months, looking at logbooks and records and stuff. And so, this is something else we feel like we're really missing, this digital layer where you could have this almost instant verification that, yes, this was harvested here at this time in this way in a very sustainable manner, get that, that extra value for your product and get rewarded for that. And that's something that, with the Whole Foods experience, I really believe there's a day to come where that's a reality.
Interesting, right? Because just being able to install the machine, then they will be able to have a sustainability certification, right?
Well,
right.
They could subscribe to a program that will issue them that certification.
Right.
But yeah,
right.
But they'd be able to prove it right away. And that's it's just like the whole system becomes supercharged. Then there's the flywheel effect. Everybody benefits. The consumer who ultimately wants their seafood as fresh and as produced as cleanly as possible. They don't want slave labor involved. They don't want a pirating of seafood. They want to know exactly what their seafood is. I mean, fraud is just a huge factor. I mean, it's almost like 1 in every 3rd fish. You don't really know even what kind of fish it is. I mean, it's a very disconnected industry, and this is trying to flip that whole thing around.
Right.
But it's been done in other industries.
When I buy tuna, I buy the tuna that shows that it's like it's not chopped tuna.
Yeah.
They have the sliced tuna, I guess is the word.
Yeah.
So you can kind of see that it's from a real fish, right? To reduce the possibility of buying other animals, right? But at the end of the day, you don't know, right? As a consumer,
well,
it's
when
hard
you go to a
know.
restaurant, you're getting that nice piece of filleted whitefish. They're going to give you what you ordered, right? And whether they really know where that came from and what it is, because they were sold something. They're buying seafood is a chain of custody commodity, which means that I own it when it's in my boat. I'm selling it to the processor or the next guy in the chain. They own it while it's in their processing plant. He's selling it to a wholesaler. They own it when it's in their cold storage. And it changes hands so many times that you can't really trace it. It's really difficult to it's very uneasy. Some you can, like maybe you're getting it right from the guy who fished it off of his boat. You know exactly where it came from. But sometimes you're buying it in a restaurant or in a market where it's just it's labeled and it's called XYZ. It looks like whitefish, and so it's got to be some whitefish, right? But
right. At that point, it's impossible to know. Well, it's difficult to know.
It's very difficult, and even when they're buying "quote unquote" sustainable, they don't really know for sure. They're trusting what their wholesaler is telling them. Who's trusting what the processor is telling them? Who's trusting what the the fisherman is telling them. And so it's kind of like that old phone, that old game telephone. The story. Ultimately, there's a lot of mislabeling. There's a lot of fraud. There's a lot of piracy. And ultimately, as a consumer, you don't want to pay for that. You'd rather pay, or at least I'd rather pay a little bit more and know it came from a clean source. That it was ethically produced.
Right.
That fishery is going to still be here next week. That it's not going to be poorly managed. And so that's the consumer movement that I'm talking about. That's what drove organics, and I think that could drive sustainable seafood.
Right. There are restaurants in Mexico
more connected. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, it's fine. There's a delay with with the internet. In Mexico there are restaurants where they grow river fish on the same lot where they fry and sell you the fish, right?
Yeah, see.
So it's very fresh, but at the end of the day, you're still trusting the people there that they're selling you the fish that it's there, and they're not bringing somebody else's fish, right?
Yeah.
So even if in that small thing, you still work by trust, right?
You do. You work by trust. So there was a major. So I was doing some work in the Gulf region, Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America, whatever you want to call it now. The Gulf, right? And there's a major restaurant chain, Molly Mahoney's, and they pride themselves on Gulf seafood. This is and there's a lot of pride for in the coast for locally produced seafood, right? Turns out they got busted. They were buying so it's just. that was cheaper. Who knows the difference? It tastes good, right? And so that's what I mean. It's just, and they're passing new labeling laws. They want to know, was it really produced in the Gulf or not, where it is. But it's very challenging because until there's more and more demand like that, most people don't realize. They think it's well regulated, like chicken and beef and terrestrial produce. But it's the Wild West still, and that's interesting because most people don't realize that.
Right. I know that I'm from Argentina, and there's been issues with Chinese boats getting into the you have a line where it's international waters, and then it's national fishing area, right? And they will just cross, harvest quickly, and then by the time the airplanes come in and see, they switch out, right? So they play that game, their chicken game kind of, where they keep going back and forth, and it's very difficult for the government to enforce the limits, right? So, and then that's the fish that they sell everywhere else, right?
China's it's like you have the whole world, right, of seafood. You divide it in half goes to China, and then the rest is pretty much, they have a huge fleet of fishing boats, and they just harvest a massive amount. It's a very populous country, and seafood's prime on their diet. But it's just when you look at it all, it's just they're a huge producer of seafood.
Right. Yeah, and they have the factory inside the boat, so they can they package everything inside the boat, and then they throw away everything they discard. So it's very efficient to keep fishing, right?
We had one of our cameras in a boat like that. They're amazing. It's a factory trawler, so they harvest and they process, and they're out there 10 months out of the year. They got a 40-man crew. They're running 24/7. It's just that it's a factory. It's a floating factory. And Chinese have a lot of those boats.
It's amazing what they can do. Yes, but with unethical practices, that's not good.
Well, the ethics are, it's the wild ocean, so lots of people make their living from that. It's as you point out, it's very difficult to regulate.
Right.
So that's the other side of the equation. If you have the consumer demand, you want it verified, you'll pay a little bit more for that. We're at that day and age where that makes sense to still happen.
Right. Similar to what happened with the white horns, right, in Africa. That there's a company building simulated horns, so they flood the market, and then there's no longer demand, and the animals are not killed anymore.
That's a whole travesty in itself.
Yes.
The way they harvest.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts on farmed fish?
Well, I think more and more of the world's depending on that, and it's the same thing. You want to know, was it farmed in a way that is going to be really fresh and wholesome, or was it farmed in a swamp somewhere in some back alley? You need other fish to feed your farm fish, and that's going to come from the ocean. So we still need to maintain the fish stocks in the ocean. But I think farm seafood is it's still it hasn't fully reached its maturity. There's a lot of problems for really farming at scale, like these big terrestrial farms. They haven't really evolved to that scale yet for fish farming. Too much problems with waste coming from the animals. How do you manage that? Too much with keeping them healthy with hormones and other kinds of drugs and stuff. And then just the populations being able to scale. How many could you fit into a pond before they become unhealthy? There's still a lot of science left to be done, and just the number of species that you could farm is very few. Compared to number of species out in the wild. So there's still a lot of science. When you asked about the AI, this is where we see our portable scanners being able to really contribute to that sampling and science, for growing new species or optimizing, growth of the current species.
Right, right. Because you can simplify the metrics, the measuring a lot of metrics from each sample very quickly and on the field without complication.
Yeah. You can start seeing the trends. It's like, oh, well, we're overfeeding these guys, we're underfeeding those guys, or we need to add more,
Right.
because we need to clean this water better, or whatever. I mean, it's just more revealing because you could sample more with more detail quicker.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Interesting.
that's the kind of idea behind it.
I think that what you guys are doing is very interesting because, it's going to help us have higher quality food for everybody, right?
That's the goal. It's just remarkable. I mean, it's an industry that we can't afford to let go away. Like, I think, I don't know how much cell phones are these days. It's probably 3 times the value, it's probably than seafood. But we could survive without cell phones, but we couldn't survive without seafood in the ocean. And it's just remarkable that for a startup, how much of an uphill battle it is to get funding for something so fundamental to us. It just always surprises me.
Right, right. Because it has so many moving parts compared to a tech startup or, other software startup, right?
It's an unknown industry. There's not a lot of exits coming from seafood. It's very analog. So by virtue of its nature makes it less attractive for funders. But the whole thing is that the less we put into it, the worse sort of out of hand it gets, and to the point of it becoming, just the perfect storm, just a big disaster.
Right, right. And the challenge of a cultural shift that you're trying to do. That's the other part that you're finding a lot of resistance in the industry. Right?
Is for what?
What I'm saying is that you find a lot of resistance in the industry when you're trying to do a cultural shift. I think that the angle of going with increased profitability for the harvesters, I think it's great because then they have a clear motivation to implement the technology.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I believe it's got to be done from the ground up. There's got to be, productivity gains from the technology, even though the real milestone is the data, but there's not a data market. And if you think about it, so like with agriculture, so back in the 70s, early 80s, GPS was first coming on. There wasn't a data market, an ag data market, right? Even though ag was still, was a traded commodity, there was value to it, but not like what they're saying now within the next 5 years, that ag data is going to be worth, over $30 billion, just information about agriculture. And then you think about seafood, what the data market is for seafood. I mean, it's the same thing. There's not a value for it. I can't collect data and say, oh, I could sell it to this guy, I could sell it to this organization, I could leverage it, I could aggregate it. There's not a real market for that. I don't have a business plan that shows how we could really create huge value from it. But with these data collectors, verifiable data collectors, and a network of demand for certification and traceability and transparency, that's what's going to build. There'll be a seafood data market to come, and that'll be a major driver for change, I believe.
Right, because that's going to be aggregated data that is going to be very valuable, and that's going to drive more innovation towards this industry.
Yeah, I believe so. You start aggregating climate data with market demand data, with harvest data, with processing data, with ground maps of the ocean, and it starts to come together. And that's the AI part. It's really being able to look at these macro data sets and be able to determine micro changes, how to manage this fishery, in a huge ocean.
Interesting. I wanted to ask you, I mentioned that you're partnered with NEC X and Techstars.
Yeah.
I wanted to understand a little bit more what role do they play in the growth of seafood AI?
Yeah, so Techstars was an accelerator type program where they made a capital investment, and then we went through a program. And then NEC is that large Japanese company, the electronics scanner company. They have a venture studio called NEC X. And so we went through that. They made capital investment into SeafoodAI, and we hope to continue to partner with them as we get more and more traction. So basically the relationship.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Right. One last question about what advice would you give to a young engineer or entrepreneur that would like to get involved in the sea industry, in the fishing industry?
Yeah, give me a call. You know, I've done a lot of tech development that was really high end, cutting edge. Worked for Xerox PARC. Was the director of e-commerce for Whole Foods, as we talked about. Was at UCSF Medical doing big data, doing some projects for breast cancer surgeons that I think you'll find a lot of fulfillment from. It's tough if you're looking at it like, oh, am I going to find a great job that's going to pay really well in this industry? I think you have to make that for yourself. But the reward of looking at a critical food system, something so intrinsic for humans, and being able to change that in a big way, I think that there's a lot of opportunity for that. So I say welcome on board and be inspired by what you could change in this world.
Great. And they can reach out to you if they have more questions.
Yeah, no. They can reach out to me if they want to help me move this, this rock forward.
Right. Awesome. So we'll share the information on the notes of the podcast so people can connect with you and learn more about Seafood AI. And hopefully in the audience we have an investor that will be interested in the project and is willing to invest. That would be great.